So Lizzie Anderson, was she an example of a typical woman of that era whose major role was being a wife and mother and homemaker?
She was. Lizzie was born and raised in Ohio. She married John Calvin Anderson. And sometime in the early 1880s, they came out to Los Angeles, where John worked as a building contractor. When Monrovia started in May of 1886, William Mills hired John Anderson to come to Monrovia and build a hotel, because of course anyone arriving here would need a place to stay if they were looking around and were serious about buying and relocating. So John Anderson built the Mills Hotel on Myrtle Avenue. At the same time, I'm guessing he looked around and said, I like this place. I like the setting. I like the mountains, the oak trees. It speaks to me. So he bought 3 lots on what was then the northern edge of the town of Monrovia. Not the Monrovia tract, which was the much larger parcel of land that was placed on the market, but the town site that was contained within it. 3 lots in Block A. And on the middle lot, for himself and for his family, he built a 6-room Victorian cottage. Probably he used a pattern book, or actually probably Lizzie used a pattern book and said, John, build that for me, and he did.
And where is this?
It's 215 East Lime Avenue. As I say, at the time it was built, it was on the northern boundary of the town of Monrovia, which is the 20 square block central area in Monrovia that was designed for people who wanted to come here and have a house in town, possibly land or outside of it, at least have a town lot on which to build a house. Completed in 1886, maybe early 1887, but I'm thinking 1886 because it's not in the 1887 list of houses constructed in that year. Lizzie had 1 son already, but for whatever reason, she went back to Ohio to give birth to her 2nd son, George. And at the age of just a few months, wherever George was old enough to travel, Lizzie returned to Monrovia. George lived the rest of his life in Monrovia, in the same house, and he used to say, I've lived in the same house for 80 plus years. I've lived in California for 80 plus years. I'm still not a native, because of course he was born in Ohio. The Anderson sons grew to maturity. John died in 1902 after serving on the city council. Lizzie lived in the house until her own death in 1929. And then George lived in the house in his entire adult life. Well, infant and adult life. He had no family. He never married. His brother Louis married and had no children. So that was the end of the Anderson line, but not the end of the Anderson name, because that house name is now the George H. Anderson House, named by the Monrovia Historical Society to honor George and his long-term residence in Monrovia, and the fact that he was very generous, not leaving money to the Historical Society, but to the California Community Foundation, which enabled the Friends of the Library to buy the house and begin the process of restoring it in 1976.
So the house is now brought back to what it would have been like in the late 1800s.
Yes.
So what would Lizzie's life have been like? What would her day be like?
I would suspect that she might have followed the tradition pattern of Monday you wash, Tuesday you iron, Wednesday you bake, Thursday you do something, Friday you do something. So Lizzie had running water in the house, but she did not have a laundry tub. I mean, not a large one. So she would do her laundry on Monday in the kitchen. Probably early on, she would build a fire in the cast iron kitchen range to heat water. And she might, I don't know where the tub would have been. Maybe it was there all the time. Maybe it was rolled away somewhere out of the way. But she would get her wash water ready by taking hot water from the wood-burning stove and pouring it into the tub with cold water to get it the right temperature. Then she would get her scrub board ready, and she would immerse the dirty clothes in the laundry water, and she'd swab probably maybe even homemade soap, and then she'd use her scrub board to really work on those clothes and get them clean. And then she had a wringer attached probably to the side of the tub, and she'd wring the soapy water out. And then she'd do a rinse cycle where she would put the clothing back in clear water and get as much as the remaining soap out of it, wring them out again, and then take them outside to the clothesline. Now the clothesline extended from the northwest corner of the house out to the privy, the outhouse, which was on the northwest corner of the property. You can see it in early pictures. That would have been a line, I'm guessing maybe 50 feet, maybe not quite 50 feet, but that's how the clothes dried in the sun. And Lizzie would then take them in, fold them in preparation for ironing the next day, and then she'd start in the next day, again, heating the wood-burning stove, heating the iron she was going to use on the stovetop. They were irons that had a detachable handle. So Lizzie would use one that was hot until it started to cool. Then she would put it back on the stovetop to heat once again. She would transfer the handle itself to one that was hot and use that, and then just alternate between the irons that were being heated on the stovetop and the ones she was using to iron.
Where would these clothes have come from? Would she have made them? Was there a place to buy them?
The clothing, I'm thinking she probably made much of it, because ready to wear was years in the future. She might have gotten standard things like men's trousers, maybe men's shirts, but I doubt men's shirts, probably trousers at the local general store. But in terms of shirts, other things that needed to be fitted, she probably cut them out of material and sewed them herself. That would have been typical for a woman of her era. And she probably had a sewing machine. It would have been pretty rudimentary, but she had a sewing machine.
A treadle?
Absolutely. No electricity, so Lizzie provided the power to operate the sewing machine, just as she provided the power to scrub the clothes, wring them out, hang them on the line, bring them in, iron them, etc.
And then what about baking bread?
I'm reasonably sure that Lizzie did bake bread. There were bakeries in Monrovia at that time. But if she didn't bake bread, she certainly probably baked pies and cakes and cookies and things like that. In fact, there's a specific reference to cookies in a letter written by Harold Frolib about the burning of the La Vista Grande Hotel. They had lived with the Andersons for a while, and then they moved into a house further east on Lime Avenue, 236 East Lime. And the night of the hotel fire, they went down to the corner to watch the hotel burn. And in Harold's letter, he said they stood there until the heat from the fire grew so intense that they had to retreat. So they went back to the Anderson house where they could watch it from inside through the wood dining room windows. And Mrs. Anderson, that he called Aunt Anderson, served them cookies of her own baking, I'm sure, while they watched the hotel burn to the ground.
Would they have had a garden in which she had done canning? And would they have had chickens and eggs or
There's
animals?
a really good chance that they would have had backyard chickens and probably a kitchen garden. And most women of that era canned in the summertime. They canned vegetables, fruits, things that grew well then, so they had them available in the wintertime. There is a canning cupboard on the back porch of the Anderson house specifically to put canned goods in. It even has some examples of the early canning jars from Ball and Kerr and other glass manufacturers of that era who provided canning jars for housewives.
Now, what about dairy products? Egg, milk and cream and the ice where they would have stored?
They probably had an ice box, which was just that. It was a box that you put ice in to keep your food and perishables cool enough that they wouldn't spoil right away. There is a large one on the back screen porch of the Anderson house. It's not the typical upright variety that you think of with the oak front and the doors. This is more like a chest where you would open the top up and then go look down. It's more like a contemporary freezer in terms of the access from the top, but there would have been ice inside, and that's where Lizzie would have kept those things that would perish. There probably was a local dairy. In fact, there was probably a milkman who delivered milk on a regular basis.
Was there a local ice man? Or
There was,
company?
I'm not sure in 1886 and 7 if there was, but later there was an iceman. fact, there was home delivery. In the kitchen of the Anderson house is a square of cardboard, and on each point is a figure, 25, 50, 75, 100. School children look at that and I say, do you know what that's for? Well, of course they have no clue. But that was a sign you would put at your back door, letting the iceman know how many pounds of ice you wanted delivered. And you would put the corner with the quantity you wanted at the very top. So the iceman would know, okay, this week, Mrs. Anderson only needs 1 block of ice at 25 pounds. He'd bring that in and place it in the icebox. Let's say she was getting ready to have ice cream. And of course she'd need ice for the ice cream freezer, so maybe she'd bump it up to 50 pounds to have enough on hand for the ice cream freezer when the time came.
And what about the barn? Would that have been her husband's purview, or would she have been part of that?
She might have used part of it for storage, but mostly that would have been John's domain, because it probably was where they housed the buggy. Maybe they housed the horse itself during the wintertime when warmth was an issue. What's there now may not be the original barn on the property, but it's certainly early because it was constructed with square nails rather than round nails. It may be that those nails were recycled from an earlier barn, but anyway, it's plank construction, plank and beam construction, and at the corners you can see the big square spikes that were used to fasten the planks to the upright posts.
Now, what would she have done for entertainment? Of course, she was raising 2 children. How old were they when her husband died and she became a widow?
Let me think. George was 15, and I believe his brother, Louis, was slightly older, not too much older.
So how would they have survived financially?
Well, I'm assuming that they had some savings. Possible that John had a life insurance policy. But I do know that George dropped out of Monrovia High School his senior year and went to work for the First National Bank to help with family finances, because by that time, Lizzie probably really did need the financial assistance to maintain her home for her son.
Okay, so then what would they have done for entertainment?
Well, I know that George, as individuals, George was a great fisherman and spent lots and lots of time in the San Gabriel Mountains fishing. His nickname was Skeeter, and I don't know whether it was because he was small or because he buzzed around like a mosquito. Anyway, that was his nickname. So he was interested in outdoor sports. I don't know much about Louis. I'm assuming bicycling, tennis playing, things that were prominent at that time would have been their activities. Lizzie probably got together with her female friends for maybe afternoon tea, or to gossip over the fence, or maybe to belong to a circle at church. The Andersons were charter members of the First Presbyterian Church in Monrovia. I'm sure there were women's organizations at that time, and it's a good guess that Lizzie was a member. And so she and her fellow members of the social group, or the social circle, probably got together frequently to enjoy each other's company, maybe to sew for a joint common cause, something like that. So in terms of entertainment, there would have been occasional things at Barnes Hall to go to. Later on, after 1900, about 1907, there were movie theaters that came to Monrovia, so those would have been available to attend.
What would a movie have been in that era? So this was silent pictures.
All right, The Great Train Robbery came out in 1903. I don't know if there was a theater in Monrovia in 1903. I'm pretty sure in 1907 there was one. My dad remembered being taken as a youngster to a theater on East Olive Avenue, and he said it was D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. And that came out, I think, about 1915, so he would have been 3 or 4 when it reached Monrovia. And that was not really a theater, it was a storefront equipped with chairs, a projector, and a screen. It was no more complex than that. But that's how you got to see a movie. You went to a storefront, sat in your hard wooden chair, and enjoyed your film, whatever it was.
So she was how old when she died, Lizzie?
Lizzie, I believe, was born in 1854 and died in 1920, so about 75, roughly 75 when she died. She's buried at Live Oak Cemetery next to John, and George is also buried at Live Oak.
So she had a good long life.
She did. For her time, that was quite elderly. Little lady, you can tell she was probably 5 feet or under by the height of the kitchen sink in the Anderson house kitchen. It's about 3 feet off the ground, maybe not even 3 feet. But if you look at it, well, that's just what I asked the school children. You see the height of that sink? How tall do you think Mrs. Anderson was? And some of them figure it out. Not very tall. That's correct. Not very tall. I'm sure because John did the sink or installed the sink, I'm sure that he probably asked his wife what height it should be for her comfort.
And it's a wooden drain board that
Wooden
survived
drain
all
board
these
that was
years.
so typical, and an old cast iron sink with a big old drain, very solid, in place brass screen to catch any food scraps or things like that. And individual faucets, no kind of mixer, one faucet for hot, one for cold. After they had hot water available, running hot water instead of having to heat it on the wood-burning kitchen range.
And when they took baths, they would have to heat that on the...
They would. Now, some people think that houses in Monrovia at the beginning did not have running water, but they did. They just didn't have indoor bathtubs. Didn't have indoor toilets. They had and sinks. They did have an indoor bathtub. Now, the bathroom, the original bathroom at the Anderson house was just that, a room with a bathtub in it. It was later, after the addition was made to the rear of the house, that contained a complete bathroom, a screen porch, and a spare bedroom or storage room. The original bathroom was no longer needed, and so the partition between the kitchen and the bathroom was removed to make a longer, larger kitchen. But you can see artifacts that let you know where that partition originally was, and the fact that it probably was maybe, let's say, 6 feet square, slightly larger, just large enough to accommodate a bathtub and space to stand next to it.
So the stove originally would have been where it is now?
I think so, because that's where the chimney flue is.
So she or somebody had to carry the water from that was heating by as
Right.
part of the stove.
There is one other possibility. There were some stoves. The one that's there now has a reservoir next to the firebox. But there were stoves that had coils in the firebox or placed where they would catch a maximum amount of heat. And so there would be piping that went from the wood-burning stove to the kitchen sink and the bathtub so you could draw hot water. That was a little more sophisticated an arrangement. I have a wood-burning stove now, probably not dating that far back, but there is a pipe that goes into the firebox, circles around, and comes back out again, and that was specifically to heat hot water, which then would have been stored in a metal boiler until it was needed.
Is that the stove you currently use?
Not yet, but it is a working model, even though it's not hooked up. Has a nice thermometer in the oven door so you can tell what the temperature is inside. And drafts to adjust, so if you want a hot fire, you could open the draft and more air would pass through. If you wanted to simmer something or back the fire overnight, you could close those drafts and it would burn slowly.
So Lizzie's life was cooking, sewing, washing, growing vegetables,
Mending.
mending.
Sure,
of course.
mending.
And raising two boys.
And raising 2 boys, 2 growing boys. And looking after her husband's, his dress shirts perhaps that needed to be starched and ironed, collars, those things. Probably in the wintertime, one of her tasks was to make sure that they had long winter underwear to keep themselves warm because the house had no heat in the bedrooms.
Oh.
So if you went to bed, Monrovia does not have extreme temperatures, but in the wintertime we get some pretty cold evenings. So I'm guessing that there would have been a time when they needed long winter underwear to go to bed in, so to keep themselves warm, so they slept comfortably during the night. Then in the morning, they might have come out and stood by the fire, the wood-burning stove in the dining room to warm up before they got their clothing on.
And she might have made quilts, or would she have knitted blankets, or would they have bought blankets?
They probably bought blankets, but I'm sure she knitted scarves, sweaters, probably even socks, mittens, things like that.
And quilts?
And quilts, that would have been like a leisure time activity. And especially if she sewed on a lot of clothing, she probably had scraps of material left over. She probably would have used those in quilts, in quilt making. So very little went to waste. They had to be frugal. They didn't have a lavish income. And some resources like material were something that you bought and then made sure you used almost all of it.
And John was active in the city. He was on
He served on the city council. He was active with, I believe, the Masonic Lodge. I think he was a charter member of the local Masonic Lodge. George was active with the Masonic Lodge later and served as treasurer for many, many years.
But John died fairly young. What did he die of?
You know, I don't know that I've ever seen the reason. He was, I think, older than Lizzie. I can't tell you exactly how much. John might have been about maybe 60 something.
Oh, not terribly young.
No, and you know, whether it was TB or, I don't know. I've never seen a reason, of course. The newspapers don't exist for that time, so I can't think of a primary resource that would identify what the cause of death was for John Anderson.
But now people can come to the Anderson house and see how the Anderson family lived.
They can. They can view the parlor that Lizzie probably kept closed off and little used, so that if someone came to call socially, she could usher them into the parlor and it would be in complete order and presentable and not an embarrassment to her housekeeping. The dining room is immediately behind the parlor and separated from the parlor with a large set of pocket doors that were practical in that it kept the parlor separate. Practical in that you would heat the dining room with the wood-burning stove that's there. You wouldn't necessarily heat the parlor. You try to keep that heat contained in one room so that you weren't heating a part of the house you didn't use a whole lot. Kitchen, of course, would have been warmed with a wood-burning kitchen range. And there might have been a very small stove in the bathroom. There is a circular hole in the trapdoor going up into the attic space. I don't know if that's original to accommodate a stovepipe, or maybe later on when gas ranges were first introduced and they were vented as well.
So originally there were 2 bedrooms, which was one
Actually 3.
Oh, originally there were 3.
Originally 3 bedrooms on the east side of the house, and then left side of the house facing north would have been parlor, dining room, kitchen. On the right-hand side of the hallway, bedroom, bedroom, bedroom.
So where was the third? Now there's an extra room in the back porch.
There is. It was added at the same time that the screen porch and the full bathroom was added.
Where was the third bedroom? That's not
on the
there
right-hand side. One of those is now being used as an office.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But that was originally a bedroom.
Of course, I was missing a room.
So that would have been a bedroom for John and Lizzie, and then a bedroom each for John,
Got it.
Louis, and for George. And that back room might have been rented out.
Huh.
I'm only suggesting that because there are 2 doors going into the bathroom, which seems a little unusual. There's the bathroom, there's a door that goes into the kitchen. There's also a door that goes onto the screen porch. And my thought is, well, if they were renting out that back bedroom as a spare room, then that meant whoever was renting it could access the bathroom without having to go through the kitchen. Just a thought. I don't know if that's correct or not. But why else to have another door unless it was to give somebody another access? So Lizzie's, as I said, Lizzie's week was probably organized around household chores. And Sunday would have been church, the Presbyterian church, and probably a quiet Sunday thereafter. Maybe a Sunday dinner, maybe guests invited to join them for Sunday dinner, which would have been a pretty substantial meal and probably served early mid-afternoon rather than dinner.
And this would have been after a Saturday night bath? Probably had one bath a week, is that true?
Whether they needed it or not. Yeah. And in larger families, I've seen the younger members of larger families describing the Saturday night bath and the condition of the bath water before they finally got to take theirs, after their older siblings had done so.
Might they have played cards, or was that too frivolous?
You know, I'm
or...
thinking that I know the Presbyterians at that time were pretty much temperance people. Maybe not quite as strongly as the Methodists, but temperance was looked on favorably. Now, I don't know if dancing and card playing was considered a sin or not, but I think they might not have played cards as a family. George might have played cards later at the Masonic Lodge, but I don't know about his home life.
So that's the story of Lizzie.
That's the story of Lizzie. Elizabeth, given name, but apparently always Lizzie. I think her maiden name was Linda Smith, and I believe she might have been of Norwegian or Swedish ancestry.